everybody, and welcome. Happy Friday, and welcome to our final event this week at the Center for Women's Leadership at the Forbes School of Business and Technology at the University of Arizona Global Campus. As we are wrapping up our celebration of International Women's Day, #BreakTheBias. We have an extraordinary event for you today. We are very honored to have with us today 4 amazing women who will share their stories and perspectives about what it means to be courageous. To our attendings, we will be leaving some time at the end of the session for questions. So if you have questions for our panelists, be sure to enter those into the chat area, and we will address as many as possible during the open Q&A time. Now let's meet our esteemed panelists who together co-authored the book, Women Courageous, Leading Through the Labyrinth, which is a collection of true experiences by women from different parts of the world, leading in the political, academic, nonprofit, public, and private sectors, which illustrates their courage, resilience, and in some cases, transformation. First up, we have Dr. Jennifer Moss-Breen. She is an executive coach, editor, author, speaker, educator, and consultant in leadership. She frequently focuses on women demonstrating courage, leadership resilience, humility, interpersonal political skills, and leadership development. Dr. Breen is currently an associate professor of leadership with Creighton University, where she helps adult learners shape themselves into strong, values-based leaders. Additionally, she serves as a program director for interdisciplinary leadership. Next, we have Madeline Vandersteeg, who is co-owner of NED NXT, a firm that assists international companies in entering the Dutch markets sustainably to grow lasting roots in the Netherlands. They handpick their international clients based on their innovation, sustainability, and organic product and service offerings. Madeline is the winner of the Businesswoman of the Year Regional Entrepreneur Award. She also serves as an adjunct professor at Webster University Business Department and is co-author and managing editor of 3 Emerald Book publications in the field of leadership. In addition to her impressive background in business startup, innovation, and leadership, she brings an impressive background in marketing, education, and volunteerism. Next, we are happy to welcome Dr. Suzanne Stigler-Martin. She is a leadership consultant, trainer, coach, and qualitative researcher with decades of experience who listens and helps to transform individuals, teams, and organizations that impact the greater good. She holds certifications in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the workplace and brings more than 20 years experience in education, management, and qualitative research. And last but certainly not least, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Judith Glick. She is a senior technical communicator, best-selling author, and speaker. For the last 16 years, she has served as president and CEO of Mentor Factor, Inc., where she advises clients on issues including downstream communication, challenges from growth that result in inefficient systems and processes, communication silos, and increasingly political culture, and being proactive in preparing organizations for unexpected events. Dr. Glick has a proven track record as a consultant with over 30 years of experience helping organizations resolve pressing issues resulting from volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and requiring creative communication, leadership, infrastructure, knowledge transfer, and training solutions. We are so very happy to welcome all of you here, and we're ready to hear what you have to share.
Thank you. I think we're gonna, is the slideshow showing? I can't see it. So is it on?
Not yet. I'm
okay. All right. I just want to make sure that before I start, while Judy does that, I'll just say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know that our team works across several, at least two continents. So I know that many of you may be from somewhere outside of where we are, obviously. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is our joy and pleasure to be with you today at the University of Arizona Global Women's Center. We know that the stories we share and those of all of our authors will inspire courage in all areas of your life. And that was the goal of the book. And it's my joy to be here with my friends and colleagues, Mads, Suze, and Jodi. When we began writing this book, we met several times to try to figure out what the goal was the book and how we can empower women through it. 4 important values emerged from our conversations. First, what we wanted to do was to bring women together, just as we are today. And we wanted to help support women in their own courageous journey. To that end, we do have a LinkedIn Women Courageous page that you can, we can send the link on to the University of Arizona team and they can share that out with all of you. But we want to have a place where women can share and learn and build a courageous community together. We wanted to hear the voices of women and to share their experiences with women. We learned that it's often very difficult to share a courageous story. And so for all of us, this was a courageous act to even embark on the book. And we know that your courage is, though it's not always easy to share, we want to encourage that in you. Thirdly, we wanted to bring learning about courage, what it actually is. And we learned that through the stories of the women and authors in the book. Everyone has a courageous story to share, but we wanted to build that and share that and shape it as an sort of iterative process. And that's indeed what happened in our book. So we're learning about the richness and wisdom in all women's lives. Many notions of courage have emerged over the centuries. And as I said, we refrained from defining courage until we heard the stories of our authors. But I'll read you briefly our definition of courage. Courage is pushing forward step by step while everything is holding you back. Often unnoticed by others, courageous acts come with a great emotional challenge, but also with a sense of purpose. Courage is an act that must be done when there are no other alternatives other than to just give up. It is how we transform not only ourselves, but those who we support and love and the work to which we have dedicated our lives. So you may ask, why the labyrinth? I don't know how many of you have perhaps walked a labyrinth. This picture is from our dear Suze's backyard where she created her own labyrinth. So if you have walked the labyrinth, you'll reflect. And if you haven't walked the labyrinth, I'll share some processes that you go through. I've walked a labyrinth many times in my life, and I always learn something by walking in the labyrinth. So to walk the labyrinth, you can see here on the photo, there's like a inverted U. That's the door of the labyrinth. And at the door of the labyrinth, you ask a question. You have a trouble or a concern or just a question you want to put out there into the universe. I often bring a piece of paper with me while I walk the labyrinth, and I hold that piece of paper and it's my reflecting landing spot. So you wind your way through the labyrinth and reflect as fast or as slow as you want to go. You can do it when you're with other people, you can do it alone, and you wind your way through. And sometimes it takes a lot longer than you might imagine because it's not, it's very purposely windy and it causes us to slow down a bit. You reach the center of the labyrinth and you stop and you reflect about what you learned on the way into the middle of the labyrinth. And you can take as much time as you want. And then you turn around and retrace the steps that you just walked as you're walking into the labyrinth. Again, as fast or as slow as you would like. And all the while listening and reflecting to what's being said to you as you walk the labyrinth. Then what I do is I often find a chair somewhere, sit on the ground if it's an outdoor labyrinth, find a bench and write down what I heard, what I learned, what I saw, what I felt when I was in the labyrinth. I've done this activity with my family. My daughter does this frequently with me. My husband has done this. And it's just a strange thing that we actually do learn and hear something. And so I encourage you. And the labyrinth is the metaphor for our book because courage is often like this too. It's something that you is not as tangible as we might like, but it's there and we can learn through all of it. So my chapter, chapter 14, tells my story of courage. It's entitled Harnessing the Courage to Survive. I'll read a bit of it to you now, and it describes the story of balance required when married to an emotionally abusive man. The day after my husband threw a glass of wine at me, which is this photo here is the moment, which is a reflection of the glass of wine landing on the wall next to me. Though there's no wine in this picture, that's how my life felt at that moment. The day after my husband threw the glass of wine at me, I called our local center for abused women. They said that because I had not been physically abused, I was not eligible for full services, but I could come in for free counseling. I had my first visit that week, and what I learned astounded me. I learned about the cycle of abuse, how behaviors often take roller coaster effect with periods of peace and periods of despair. I learned that over time, behaviors tend to get worse rather than better. And as a woman becomes stronger and pushes back against abuse, violence often escalates. And so I was terrified. And I took all of my counselor's advice and I put it into action, which in and of itself was a courageous act that I believe ultimately saved our lives. Eventually, I told my husband I wanted to end our marriage. I said I wanted a divorce. I remember him standing outside our garage. I went out to talk to him and he said, I will never be divorced again. A few days later, my husband disappeared. It was fall and cold and gray outside, and he was unreachable. Not knowing where he was and concerned that he might not be okay, I called the police and asked them to do a safety check for him. They were able to trace his phone and they found him in his car in a church parking lot. He had taken a handful of prescription pills, most of them old painkillers that I had in my closet for the long ago back surgery. He had written a long note about why he was trying to kill himself, what a witch I was, and the details of the pills he had taken and their ingredients, which I thought was sort of curious. The police took him to the hospital and then to the community health center. He stayed there for the mandatory 3 days. I did not want him to come home. None of his family wanted to claim him, but eventually his sister flew in to bring him back to California. I was afraid of my husband. And so I told my husband's sister that I did not want him back in our house. She promised she would take him home at the end of the 3rd day. And essentially what happened was she brought him back to my house and left him on our front porch. He was all smiles and he was ready to fix it all. My husband committed suicide on December 17th, 2007. So that was just about a month after he'd been in the hospital and had his first attempt. My daughter, who is now 15 years old, was only 16 months when he died. The Women's Center counselor was right. If someone is willing to take their own life, they're usually ready to take the lives of others. I am grateful for the wisdom of my counselor because she likely saved not only my life, but also the life of my daughter. For a long while, I hid his story. I was embarrassed. It was very hard to write the chapter, and it took me 10 years, now 11, to have the courage to share the story out loud. I wanted to hide the story. But Women Courageous Leading Through the Labyrinth allowed me and other women to bravely share the story they were afraid to share and to answer the question that no one had ever asked. So my key takeaways very briefly for you are to listen to your inner voice and follow your intuition and take steps. If you feel like something's wrong, something is probably wrong. And most women, the courage piece of this is that we want to write it off and pretend that it's not happening and that we're not afraid and that we can handle it. But really, I think it's best to be safe than sorry. And so tell anyone. I told my parents, I told my neighbors, I told the counselor, and now I'm telling you, please, if there's something that you feel is not going as it should, please share. Lead with your whole self. Tell your story and support others who will share their story with you. Lead authentically, lead with humility, lead with courage. The world needs you. And now I'm going to pass the baton to Mads. Thank you.
Is
Madeline,
muted.
you're muted.
Thank you. I'm Madeleine, and I am the co-author of Chapter 7, Courageous Dreams and the Leadership Power to Change the World. And I wrote this chapter with Dr. Karen Orklep and Dr. Lisa Kinnear about Mari Sukkers. The Honorable Mari Sukkers is a member of Parliament in South Africa. So with further ado, let's go meet Mari.
Honorable Chair, Honorable Speaker, I wish to borrow words from a poet. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. There are moments that call for pause. That moment is now. Now we must stop the rhythm of the debate and call ourselves to quiet. It is amazing to me that a young woman stands in front of this house and she reads headline after headline and she quotes statistics. And in the halls of this parliament, we can still have conversations, muffled, while hundreds of our young women are dying on our streets in the most atrocious manner. The ACDP calls on this house to forget our politics and to lead a national call for prayer.
So Mari clearly displayed courage in this video. But who was Mari? Where did she come from? And where did she find her courage? How did she develop her power? I've been friends with Mari for over 2 decades, and it's my privilege to share her story with you. This is her story. I grew up on a farm in the Boerland in South Africa. It was beautiful, and I felt like I was part of a greater whole. I was born a mixed-race person referred to as colored, and grew up with my mother initially suffering terrible abuse under my dad. My mother truly imprinted the belief that I should not back down or give in to fear, or even pander to what's expected of me, but to pursue what is right and never allow anyone to put you down or mistreat you. My mother gave me the ability to be true to myself, stand my ground no matter how afraid I am. Even when I was small, I believed I was powerful, and my power comes from not backing down and the confidence I built in my ability. On my first day at school, I was so excited by all the books because I was already able to read. When I was also very small, I was taken to my aunt to be looked after because my mother had to leave me for a few months. She explained, "I'm leaving you, but God will never leave you. You must continue, even if it's hard." I was crying. Pointing up, she said, "You see the sky? God is like the sky and always with you." She gave me such faith in God, which transformed my life. My failures, regrets, resistance to change, all covered by my belief that God is. As little as I was, I walked back to my aunt on my own. Later, I attended Bible college and became a pastor in South Africa. During this time, I fell in love with a bad boy, which to church people and people in the community made no sense. The relationship got rough and reached a breaking point one night when my life was in danger. It was very traumatic and frightening. I walked into the situation. I chose this relationship and now suffered the emotional damage. After this incident, I walked away telling him, "This will never happen again." Suddenly, I was discarded by church. I was uninvited to conferences and meetings. The judgment in religion shook me. It was terrible. I had felt like I had failed. Years later, my husband lovingly challenged the way I thought about these things. I rediscovered myself. Besides learning to forgive myself, I developed a deep sense of empathy and understanding for others instead of judging them. In the next phase of my life, it started early one summer morning. I was walking to my job as an HIV lay counselor and coordinator. I felt that inner yearning to grow and develop further begin to stir again. I hungered to know more, to be more than just another woman of color with a fractured past and an unfinished education and only legs for transport. Through the help of a friend, I was invited to an interview at a company in Johannesburg. That day set me on a new path of self-discovery and self-leadership. I began acquiring knowledge about the amazing worth of my talents as a human being and how much of my world is waiting on me to rise and deliver. My relationship with my new employer and later business partner would add another highly prized value I desperately needed: affirmation. The world I came from was a culture of day-to-day survival. It was if a finger was placed on the latent potential in me and whispered, breathe. I came into politics in 2019 with the same idealism I'd always had. I learned in politics, people are not always authentic. They often do what's most expedient or what works the most for them in the moment, and they do not always adhere to their values. What keeps me here is I was sent here by my constituency, who looked to me to demonstrate leadership. Upon my election, I could not believe I had the opportunity to serve the nation, or that my mission statement had made a difference. So my advice to women leaders is to trace the line of your own story to the point where it has brought you. If you do not anchor yourself in who you are, you move with the seasons, you compromise and adapt, which can lead you to a result you do not want. Take the time to articulate what you want to achieve. Do only the most meaningful things that contribute to your sense of self. All that you do must be aligned with your deepest desires. And thirdly, build your tribe. Offer others the opportunity to be part of your tribe because they embrace you and your ideals. Do not sacrifice yourself based on a need for recognition. And finally, the greatest value we bring to the world is our belief and a sense of purpose and having a reason to exist. Thank you. That was Mari's story. And I now hand you over to Suzanne Martin, who will share chapter 2 in our book, The Next Courageous Story.
Thank you, and good morning and afternoon to everyone. I had the joy of co-writing this chapter with this young woman named Alisha Damron Seruyange, who I've known for several decades. It is an American in Uganda sharing power and living to learn. So as I share this story, listen for the threads of not giving up just because it's hard or because you realize you're not perfect, or that you find yourself on the outside while you're trying to accomplish a really big dream. And these are her words. Mine is a small story. It's a story about mud and mothers, power and Play-Doh, friendship and failure. It's a story that unwraps the deep goodness of the people where I live, the harm discovered in what I thought were good intentions, and the courage to stay and be transformed. It's a story that no longer belongs to me, yet I find the deepest parts of myself woven into the fabric of this beautiful community work, where tiny bits of courage found me and kept me here. I had just graduated from university when I first traveled to East Africa. I couldn't quite explain the gravitational pull I felt toward the motherland. I was too ignorant and naive to sort out the layers of colonialism, power, and race as they connected to my desires to experience the continent. I was doped up on Disney movies like Cheetah and A Far Off Place. As a white female from a middle-class evangelical Christian family, I had noticed racism, but I was blind to being a beneficiary of systemic racism and an agent of its grip on the world. I was desperate to believe that a colorblind approach to life was possible. During that time, her very first trip to Uganda, Alisha worked on a dairy, in a garden. She was a librarian. She taught drama, and she stayed for a couple of years. She said on the flight back home to the US, she knew in her bones she would be back. She didn't know she would stay. So she went to Duke Divinity School and then back to Uganda, working at a school where she met Abdul, her husband, and the tiny seed of a dream took root. It grew over 10 years into a family that you see pictured in this photograph, and they founded what is now Terra Nova Uganda. It's an organization that includes a school and a soccer club. She leads a team of 25 Ugandans promoting excellence in the Ugandan classroom. Abdul leads operations of summer soccer programs, training for 100 youth for competitive play and professional development. She describes what it was like to get started. In the first years of running a school, I overcompensated my cultural learning curve with an addiction to perfectionism. I was blind to how my physical presence represented power over abundance, wealth, and unearned expertise to this community. I pushed hard for conformity to my precise ideas, fearful of failing at giving children a worthy education. It mattered so much. I had to deliver. Fixated on follow through, I was meticulous in each task. I consistently crashed. Alisha describes one particular crash entitled On the Outside Looking In. During one circle time, I remember learning the most significant lesson of my early leadership journey. Right before Duck Duck Goose, I noticed a student who was not participating. I had pinpointed a powder. I knelt to the next to the student who looked grumpy and uncooperative, and I tried enthusiastically redirecting her. It failed. Sing and participate or sit out. My voice punched. She followed me to the steps on the front porch where she sat, deflated. Shrugging her shoulders, she began to cry. My husband approached and, saying nothing, softly took her hand and they walked off together. Flustered with the beginning of an imperfect day, I rushed off to the tasks waiting for me in the office. What was her problem? I asked him later. She was hungry. I made her a snack and sent her to class. Wait, what? My mind was reeling, and I had disappointed myself deeply. I had punished a hungry child. What an ass. How did my husband know instantly what was happening, and how could I have been so inaccurately interpreting the situation? How many other situations was I reading wrong? At this point, there was still so much I didn't know about the hunger of my neighbors, their experiences with poverty, and the cultural expectation of children to keep quiet. I wish this scenario woke me up for good, but the truth is that the entire year was filled with these moments that made me necessarily and acutely aware that I was an outsider who had much more to learn than to teach. Eventually, I would encounter challenges differently. I kept myself from reacting so quickly. I stopped and listened. I habitually began asking myself and those I worked closely with, what am I not able to see here? What lived understanding is required to offer a productive response to this situation? At the end of writing the chapter, Alisha and I brainstormed, and we created a list of 8 ideas that we learned about courage. Courage is staying power. It is like Play-Doh. You must be pliable. Yield to the transformative, external, harsh hands of context and circumstance. You have to be able to look at the ugly and the undesirable and the unpleasant, the imperfect. You do hard things with resolve. It's an unwillingness to compromise on the quality of the mission outcomes just because a community is obscure and under-resourced. It's loosening your tight grip of control. It's giving up on the all or nothing perfectionism. And finally, courage is dynamic, not static. It's not simply inside a person. It grows between and among members of a community. And now I would like to pass the baton to Jodi Glick-Smith.
Hi, everyone. The chapter that I wrote was chapter number 9, Battalion Chief Jodi Gabelmann's Journey to Peace and Pride. Jodi Gabelmann chose a career in fire and emergency medical services during a time when few women followed that path. She often found herself in situations that were overtly misogynistic and was passed over for promotions. However, she persevered. She was open to criticism and even put into place a feedback mechanisms to help her with her communication skills. She remained focused and team-oriented. She sought out mentors. She determined to be the best firefighter she could be while maintaining her integrity as she strived toward her high goals of service. When I met Jodi in 2010, I was working on my doctoral research into what I called flow-based decision-making. I was studying how being in a flow state impacted decision-making in critical incidents. During this process, I encountered an elite group of firefighters who had completed an extreme experiential training program called Georgia Smoke Diver. Jodi is Georgia Smoke Diver number 481. She was a participant in my study. Here's Jodi's story. When I first got hired into fire and EMS, I attended a 16-week training class. The resistance to a female in the class was immediate and palpable. Snide remarks about the doubts and the doubts about my physical strength were both said and unsaid. The sexual harassment followed right behind. During a training exercise, a fellow recruit decided it would be funny to pull my head toward his crotch during a search exercise while I was on my hands and knees and my face piece was blacked out. The training staff also thought it was funny, turning away and laughing after I pulled my mask off. What they did not think was funny was when I picked up my fellow recruit and slammed him to the ground. In fact, the training captain made it a point to tell me how not funny my reaction was by calling me into his office and berating me for my behavior. Challenges kept coming in the form of station life, emergency scenes, and promotional opportunities. They were grinding and at the same time grounding. Eyes always seemed to be watching me. I worked harder to assure those with raised eyebrows. I noticed that a few members of the department had a Georgia Smoke Diver rocker patch on their uniform sleeve. It looks like the rocker you see in this picture. Each carried himself with an air of confidence and determination. Through some inquiries and research, I found that the Georgia Smoke Diver program was a voluntary course specializing in self-survival, advanced firefighting procedures, teamwork, discipline, leadership, situation awareness, and decision-making. The 6-day program is very physically demanding. There's a physical training program every morning and gradually done in full gear and breathing apparatus. I wanted in. Being a firefighter is a dangerous profession. I was drawn to this program out of a sense of self-preservation. If I got in trouble during an incident, I wanted to know how to get out. My application was accepted for the program. I passed the entrance exam and the physical agility test. I made it midway through Wednesday afternoon training exercise when I had to ring the bell, which indicated I could go no further in the class. An ambulance carted me to the hospital. I nearly met the criterion for heat stroke. Defeated, disappointed, and feeling like a failure, I returned home. I received a call from my deputy chief, John McLaughlin, Georgia Smoke Diver number 9, telling me he would arrange for me to attend the next class. I politely declined the offer. Upon returning to the station duty, he summoned me into his office. He strongly encouraged me to return to the program because smoke divers don't quit. He believed in me. I returned to the next scheduled smoke diver class more prepared and more determined. All the instructors observed me very closely on the opening days. On day 2 of morning PT, I shouted to lead instructor Scott Millsap, number 25, "I got this." He nodded. The next day, the instructors announced that they had selected me to be the class leader. I finished the program beyond sore and proud to be Georgia Smoke Diver number 481. Georgia Smoke Diver program developed invaluable skill sets within me. These new skills would guide me through situations in life, both on and off the job. The program taught me how to navigate difficult situations, make the right decisions when pushed to the brink of physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. It taught me to be focused and in the flow. The lessons taught me to remain calm so that I could get out if I found myself in a dangerous situation. After going through the program, I knew I could fight fire with anyone. Georgia Smoke Diver training delayed my self-appointed timeline for professional and personal achievements by a year. That delay and the lessons learned there guided me through the rigors of what was to come. Promotional processes and countless hours of study and some scenario-based task development were required before taking and passing a test for advancement. And yet I was able to achieve the ranks of engineer, lieutenant, captain, and battalion chief. According to Jodi, being second refers to a state of mind, an acceptance of circumstance, being content knowing that you are living your best life and not relying on others to dictate what your best life should look like. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to make this journey. This is a picture of Jodi with Michelle Moon, who just last Friday completed the GSD program, and also Melissa Coker, who completed it in 2016. Out of the 1,129 smoke divers, only 10 are women. The program encourages women to come to the class, but very few even try. Jodi credits her own success with those who mentored her and believes in passing that mentoring forward. Jodi's advice to women consists of the following: put in the hard work needed to accomplish your goals, build a support system, seek out positive mentors, identify people you can trust to serve as a sounding board and who will provide you with a safe place to vent. Exercise your body and mind, build your inner strength, limit your emotions around those who will use them against you. Ask for feedback and never compromise your foundation or your integrity. now we are I'm going to turn this over to Allie to conduct our Q&A. Let me tell you a little bit about this slide, though. These are the themes that came out of working on this book. It was pretty consistent throughout the book. And I put the slide up here. You don't have to address these bullets. They are just there in case they jog any kind of question that you want to ask. So I'll turn this over to you, Allie.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your own stories. Well, I'm sure brought out different emotions, whether it was your own story or a story you shared of others. Madeline and Suzanne, you both touched on this piece of perfection. And I think that's really interesting. Next week, the Center for Women's Leadership will have a talk about self-confidence, the imposter syndrome, and often that comes down to these feelings of perfection and how we kind of drive perfectionism in ourselves. So Madeline, you said the goal is wholeness, not perfection. And Suzanne, you shared not giving up when you are not perfect. And you talked a bit about addiction to perfectionism. Can you share, both of you, either of you, can you share your thoughts on perfectionism and how that kind of was woven through multiple stories that you shared?
I'll make a comment first to hand over to Suzanne. I think that often perfectionism is almost kind of a defense that we acquire in order to make our way through the world. But the way to really mitigate and test your perfection is to really see it as a defense, and that honestly, if you take steps to risk more, your experience will help break through those barriers, because you will learn from experience. I can do more. I can survive. It's going to be okay. It's going to be hard. So I think those are sort of key lessons, that you need to push yourself beyond what you think. And we use perfectionism to try and control and avoid disappointment or rejection or failure. But failure is a wonderful, wonderful source of learning and insight that you could never get if you did not fail.
As Alisha and I talked through some of the themes and we talked about perfectionism, part of it's just a running tape for her in her head, which was constantly criticizing what she wasn't achieving. It can come from a good place. I mean, just, or wanting everything to be perfect, because the school system in Uganda was very corporal punishment oriented. It costs a lot of money to go to school. So she had this really wonderful big dream and she wanted so much to give. She got that confused with getting it right rather than doing all she could. Learn for her, and I would say for any of us that are pretty focused on perfection and finding what's wrong and fixing it, it was learning to make friends with that voice in her head rather than pushing it away and being like, I don't want to be perfect. Like, her desire for it to be perfect or whole was a good thing. The hard part was that nasty drone in her mind, like, that's not good enough, that's not good enough. Had she given in to, well, if it can't be great, I'm not going to do it, she wouldn't have stayed. She would have sunk into shame, which is a really powerful emotion that keeps us stuck, rather than, oh, hello, perfection, or hello, inner critic, I know you want the best for me, but you need to take a cup of tea and sit back and let me fail. It's gonna be okay, and I'm gonna learn from this. And so it wasn't a one and done, gosh, I don't care about perfect outcomes, but it was an embrace of, I kind of want things to go my way, but things going my way may not be the best, and I don't have to be perfect. And that was, I think, freeing for her. I think it's freeing for all of us when we realize that that's not a prerequisite for success or for big dreams coming true. And so she's much freer these days to own that failure. So I thought it was big for her. Most of the chapter is about, ooh, that was a mistake. Look what I learned. So she has befriended that. And I would say one mantra that I try to keep in mind is that we are all imperfectly perfect, or we're perfectly imperfect. And that is what makes us human.
I love that. Making friends with the voice in your head. Mine might need more than a cup of tea, but maybe a sip of tequila, but I'll work on that for sure. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think Jodi's story, Judith, that you shared with us, when she said, remain calm so I can get myself out of danger. Obviously, she was talking about fire danger, but I see that as a huge metaphor for what we can do. Do you have any tips on how women in their fields or in their families, in their workplace, anything, that how we can kind of recenter ourselves when we have that moment of panic? Kind of, I know there's a lot here with building support system, being flexible. What of these speaks to you the most for remaining calm and getting out of danger?
I can kind of give you another story that Jodi told me when I was interviewing her for my PhD, because she's an amazing woman. She's very tall. She's 6 feet tall, and she is, I guess you might call it, but she can be a badass. I can say that. She's driven. And, but when she was telling me her stories for my PhD, she told me a story about how she had to take care of her mother was diagnosed with ALS, and Jodi had to slow down, and she had to learn to be patient. And I think that those lessons around that, and her mother taught her that, because she would be on the call with insurance companies trying to make things happen, and they wouldn't happen, and she would get so frustrated, and her mother told her, you have to slow down. And that comes straight out of Jodi's story also. It's another side of her, and it taught her to be a better communicator. It taught her to breathe. She had to slow down. I think that is we forget to breathe sometimes. I'm very bad at that myself. I have to remind myself to stay in the moment and breathe, because it will be okay. And when you're a firefighter, you have to slow your breathing down if you get yourself in a bad situation, because guess what? You only have 30 minutes of air in your back, in your bottle. And if you don't slow down and you breathe too hard, you're going to use up all your breath. And that has bad consequences. So breathing, trying to keep yourself in the moment is what I would suggest.
That is fantastic advice. And we can give ourselves a little more leeway than 30 minutes, unlike our firefighting friends. Jennifer, I want to talk to you a bit, since you shared your own personal story here. In Women Courageous, you highlight numerous examples of women who are survivors. They've survived situations and obstacles that would seem insurmountable to most. Unfortunately, when women survive difficult situations, they are often referred to as victims. Why do you think it's so important to make that distinction between victim and survivor? And how does that simple distinction have such a profound effect on the woman, on the individual?
What a great question. Yes, I suppose the tendency is to, the formal word is that someone is a victim of emotional or physical abuse. They are perceived as the victim. And to flip that coin over and to think of someone as a survive and even thrive situation. I mean, just even visually, you see that the person has suffered something, but they're doing something about it now to get themselves beyond that. So being the victim encourages someone to stay there. And being the survivor or the thriver allows someone to move forward. And like all the other stories you've heard, because you flip that coin and you perceive yourself not as the victim, but as someone who can thrive. It's like a stairway. It's a building block that piece by piece by piece, that thing that you were a victim of becomes further away from you. And you've set around safety and things in your life to help you move forward. And it's never going to be perfect. There's going to be continuous bumps in the road, but still you have that flipped mindset that says, I'm going to do this for myself, my family, my friends, my life. And as I said, it was 10 years ago or 11 years ago for me. And it's been that process. Like, it's a healing, and it's a process that requires the mind to flip to that new way of thinking. And when someone says you're a victim of something, you say, yeah, but I'm working through that, and I'm now beginning to thrive, and I'm learning a lot about myself through that process. So I don't know if that helps, but it's really within us to make that switch and not rely on the victim mentality to keep us where we were.
I bet there's a feeling of safety in that stationary box of being the victim, and it probably requires a lot of courage to flip that mindset and that mentality to become the thriver rather than just the survivor. And what a great mental mindset to share with everybody.
Yeah.
I'll push this one back to Madeline. We know that this research and collaboration that you've all done together began long before the pandemic. But in a recent article, you stated the following: our book writing in lives from all the corners of the globe were soon in turmoil during the early stages of pandemic. However, as editors and authors, we got online and shared how the pandemic impacted us each, and it gave us greater perspective and mutual support. The challenges we felt became spoken, normal, and okay. I love that last part about it being spoken, normal, and okay. Research has continually shown that women were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and many are still struggling to figure out how to be okay. What advice would you give them to help them get comfortable speaking about things that are uncomfortable so that they too can reach the point where they feel okay again?
I think what we really saw in creating our book, because we, as Jen said at the beginning, we as editors first cast a vision of what it is we wanted to create. And then we reached out and found authors and chose the stories and co-wrote with some of them. And we decided to bring the authors as well as the editors together in common meetings as we wrote the book to share, what are you working on? How's it going? What are the obstacles to update? And started building that community. And I think at our very first or second meeting, COVID had hit. And it was really so difficult for each one of us to write because everybody had enormous drama going on. You know, there was just, kids were at home, you know, there was just a lot of fear. There was, we all had to switch roles, make spaces in our homes, reorganize, you know, things. And we each sat with those stories, but the minute in those common meetings, together with our authors and the women who we wrote the stories about, we really set the tone and started sharing how we really felt that this is really so difficult. We just can't write. And then the stories just tumbled out, and they were tragic stories. They were really difficult stories, to hear. But that sharing, that safe space of dropping the guard, being vulnerable, asking for help, just saying what was going on was just the glue. It was the glue to bond us, but also the glue for us to kind of personally hold it together and then go back into our lives, and we would catch up again later on. And, we completely shifted the timeline of the book as a consequence of that. We decided, okay, we're letting go of that. We're writing this book in a manner that we're taking control. We're doing this book when we're good, when we can. So I think those were some of the, the elements that really helped to manage that kind of thing. It's just to try and find a community, to, for it to be a safe space, to take that step, and it could be step by step, be vulnerable, to ask for help and tell your story, as opposed to this, this inner conflict that, especially in the social media setting, that people have to sort of, to fake it, that I've made it, and, to have that facade, which takes so much energy, but to just be real and to be authentic. And, those were moments, golden moments for us. So, yeah.
It's so true. It's easier and so much better on ourselves to be authentic and real. And it takes so much energy to put up that fake facade and act like everything is perfect. So thank you for sharing the experience about your stories. I loved the courage is Play-Doh. It's dynamic and it's not static. And that's going to be something. I have all these Post-it notes by my desk here. And I think that's going to be my focus for next week, thinking about courage being dynamic. It's going to change and evolve, and we'll have ups and downs, just like we did with COVID, like you were sharing, and just thinking about how to be pliable and keep it moving forward. So we want to thank you so much for being here with us, our esteemed panelists, for sharing your time, your insight, and your perspectives. A huge thank you to our attendees as well for your support. Remember that we have a community chat coming up next week on the 15th, where we will focus on self-confidence and overcoming the imposter syndrome, which I will be one of the hosts. And I'm excited because I've got some new information from our talk here today that I will share with everyone. So please be sure to hop over to the CWL website, where you can register for upcoming events. And I wish you all a great Friday and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us here.